Welcome to the OpinioNation podcast, a conversational examination of the topics in our cultural narrative which do not make sense. Okay, we're metering. Yes, that's good. Staying fairly close to the mic. Say hello.
Hello.
Yes, it all looks reasonable. Okay. Well, welcome to our little podcast. Dear listeners, this is an ongoing conversation that will probably never end. If we don't cover a topic completely, we usually circle around to it again at some point, I guess. So just a little bit of bookkeeping at the start of this episode 4 is I've got a couple of new microphones, which you can probably hear, which might make life a little bit easier from the mixing side of things. And another one was a few times during the first 3 episodes, we've discussed the idea of tax and what it's for, and I've started to look into a thing called MMT, which is also called modern monetary theory. And I don't have an economics background, but what I'm gradually discovering, and I'll inform you more as I learn more, I guess, is that a lot of the way we look at tax and money is really quite backwards. There's this idea that is in the public consciousness that we tax people, then we spend the money. And that is actually not exactly what occurs. We've mentioned this a little bit in passing in earlier rants, but government actually, a sovereign government with a central bank that it controls, can issue money anytime it wants. That's the nature of a fiat currency, which is not backed by anything physical. So just a few points about modern monetary theory that I've learned so far. You don't need to tax to spend. There's no particular problem running a deficit because, I mean, really, you're just owing yourself money. So so I borrow from myself to pay myself back. Why would I do that? You know, it's actually not important is the point. And that means that if we really wanted to, this year, politicians could decide to simply manifest the money for infrastructure projects and grant full employment to every citizen of Australia. If they want a job, they can get one.
What would that do to our exchange rate?
I'm not sure about that. I'm still new to this. But what has turned out to be a part of this modern monetary theory is that manifesting extra cash does not necessarily increase inflation. Because if it's going to productive purposes, then it all balances out. So inflation occurs elsewhere in the system.
Right.
So when I said something like it's like living on a credit card, that's actually incorrect. And I think I said the more you print money, the more you devalue all the other money. And that's not necessarily correct either.
Okay.
So just put a pin in that because it's really hard to get out of old habits of discussing governments and budgets.
So there's something mysterious going on with money, and it's not what we actually think it to be.
Well, here's the thing. None of this is actually new, and it's not like there needs to be a change in the system for monetary policy, for modern monetary theory. It's already how it works. So anytime we want to, we could solve poverty in Australia in a year. We could.
Awesome.
And that simply takes a decision and a central bank that we control.
Yep.
So that, it's just old thinking that restrains us into the idea that a country is like a household budget. A household can't manifest its own currency.
No.
Do you see what I mean?
That'd be nice.
Yeah, so federally we can just manifest money whenever we want to put towards any project or problem that needs to be solved.
Yep.
But a state in Australia can't do that because they get their budget from
the federal budget.
So a state budget is closer to a household budget, as I understand it right now, which might change.
Okay, so work in progress.
Yeah. Man, my eyes were glazing over reading about this stuff. I mean, I don't have an economics background, and by the time you've reached page 17 of some paper or other on modern monetary theory, it all just starts to swim in front of your vision, and there's like derivatives and yeah.
No, yeah, I mean, not the most entertaining thing, but still,
but anyway,
it's worth to understand.
one conclusion was whenever a government says we can't afford it, they're lying to you. It's actually that simple.
Right. Well, that's
They
good to know.
are lying to you. If they say we have to make cuts, we have to get a surplus, they're wrong. They're flat, dead, absolutely wrong.
Righto.
And even the Greens go along with this sort of thing. Oh, can we? Who's going to pay for it? How can we afford this project? You know.
Well, it seems logical to the everyday person that there needs to be money going in for money to come out, just like a household budget. But when you add the fact that they can actually make all the money they want, and I suppose, you know, the trees are there to make the lumber to make the house.
Well, I think it's more that there's this popular perception that you have to tax to get money to spend money. And that in itself is wrong. Because what happens to our tax is it goes to the government, back to the central bank, as you put it the other episode, back to the manufacturer, and it ceases to exist.
Yeah.
It actually stops existing.
Yeah, which,
because it's controlling the money supply, the amount of money in circulation.
Which seems crazy, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense.
It's like if I was to use that example of living on a credit card, it would be a credit card that you created for yourself. So if you want to charge yourself interest, you're welcome to, but why would we really? So the central bank's interest rates are much, much, much lower than commercial banking.
Yeah.
So I don't think there's any actually real reason why a government has to borrow from some private source at all.
Okay. Well, I suppose the obvious one here is as well, if nothing else, when was the last time we didn't have money to go to war?
Oh, yeah, they're happy to manifest that, aren't they?
Yeah. You know, we can always pay for, $35 billion on...
Yeah. Billions and billions of dollars on Lemon fighter aircraft.
Yeah, the F-35s. Is
it
$35 billion on F-35s?
I don't know the figure.
It's a lot of $1 billion.
It's a lot of billions of dollars.
On a joint fighter from America that catches on fire if it's above 40 degrees.
Yeah, it overheats, and then when it's flying around and it overheats, you have to open up the doors to cool it down.
Which cancels out its stealth capabilities.
Yes, because now it's like, there's a thing on my radar because its doors are open.
Oh, and the standard bombs don't fit, so they have to remanufacture all bombs for this particular aircraft.
Yeah.
And I heard another one. Unless you're incredibly fit and have a strong neck, the helmet is so heavy that if you eject, it'll kill you.
Right. It'll snap your neck.
Yeah.
Right. So when the thing overheats and starts to fall out of the sky, when you pull the ejection cord or whatever it is...
Your head gets torn apart.
Your head gets... Yeah, right. Okay.
Yeah.
So this smacks of excellent logical forward planning, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's just not... Just not an aircraft we should be paying
This relates to a term called the military-industrial complex. The military-industrial complex.
Well, the other one is like spending a whole bunch of money on submarines. I mean, if you look at much of the modern defense doctrines and such like that, the submarines are almost completely outdated.
Yeah, there's a thing that I think the US and various other countries are trying to invent underwater drones for military purposes because you don't really need a submarine full of people if you can do it by remote control.
Well, the thing is now, with radar and sonar and all sorts and whatnots and guided missiles and the like, submarines are incredibly vulnerable. They're almost impossible not to detect. And, we talk about stealth submarines, but still at the same time, there's not a lot of point for them. And when you look at who we fight or who we're ever going to fight, they don't really have much in the way of navy or underwater, fighting capacity.
Yeah, like
anyway.
ISIS doesn't have a navy.
No, ISIS doesn't have a navy. And even if you want to talk about Russia, I mean, if Russia and Australia and America go to war, it's not going to be fought with boats. It's going to be fought with nukes.
Well,
or politics or money.
I don't even want to speculate on that at this point.
Yeah.
That's
But I mean, that's the thing. Everybody that we could go to war with that has a navy has nukes.
I think most of the point of submarines is, for the US at least, their nuclear subs, is being able to sneakily put a nuclear bomb anywhere in the world off the coast of any country in the world.
Yeah.
And that would be the point. Because there's always this arms race between stealth and detection.
Okay, so a sub with nuclear missiles might work. Australia doesn't
No,
have
no,
nukes.
no. I don't know what our subs are going to be for.
Yeah, Australia is going to have subs that are for...
Well, maybe they can listen to other subs or something. So it's a great big microphone in a tube under the water.
Yeah, we could do that with a boat.
Yeah, I suppose. You can see
A boat that
on
we
a
could use for
satellite.
other things.
Anyway, this is weird military speculation.
Yeah,
Before I mentioned the military industrial complex, and one of the reasons I mentioned that was because we were talking about the expense of these fancy fighter jets that don't seem to actually work.
Yeah.
Lockheed Martin is a huge global corporation which manufactures these aircraft, right?
Yeah.
And if you want to look at it one way, taxpayers are handing money to Lockheed Martin for an endless project of trying to make a lemon of a fighter work, I guess.
Yeah, I don't think they're even actually ready yet.
Yeah, I think some have been given to Israel or delivered to Israel. But what I was getting at is these military companies in the US are such a powerful economic force that if all of a sudden you stopped turnover, the entire economy would probably crash.
Or what is it? Something like 50% of America's GDP is on military?
Yeah, their discretionary spending, it's more than 50% goes directly to the military. And yet they can't fix their roads. They can't get fresh water to a whole city. They can't fix a flood-prone city. They can't... Yeah.
No, look, let's be fair to
Priorities,
America. When you've got troops in 70% of the world's countries, that's 70% of the countries in the world has US troops in it. Now, they have to obviously put a lot of money into it for that.
Well, I'm wondering where the return is. Because we keep talking about war as if it's an expense.
Well...
But you got to keep in mind, somebody manufactured every bullet. Somebody manufactured every bomb, plane, ship that's in service.
American companies manufactured a lot of things that go boom.
Also export them.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems like even if you want to treat war as an expense, there's still a lot of manufacturing that went on.
Yeah. And what is it? The cost of rebuilding a city or a country after it's been invaded is slightly more than the expense of invading it?
That would probably be about right.
Yeah.
Especially what you do is you destroy a city. This is disaster capitalism. Destroy a city and treat it like it's an opportunity. So Western construction firms could potentially move in.
Yeah.
You know, and make a whole lot of profit.
Rebuild it.
Yeah.
Bringing money back to the system.
Yeah. Disaster capitalism as a term has been around for quite a while. And I think shock doctrine from Naomi Klein and some of Noam Chomsky's work address this, the idea that it's actually economically a good thing in a consumption-based economy to knock a building down and rebuild it.
Well, more consumption.
Well, yeah, you employ a lot of people and round it goes. I don't know. That seems kind of wasteful to me, but what do I know?
Well, yeah. It's gaming the system, isn't it?
All right. So anyway, that's just I guess a brief little thing about disaster capitalism and war and expense. But we were talking about the idea that most people don't understand that it's not their tax that pays for these things. So a central bank simply manifests the money to pay for these things.
Yeah.
Right? So when a politician is saying, where's the money going to come from for this awesome policy that some minor party comes up with? Say they want to go increase welfare or provide jobs for all sorts of people or build a great big infrastructure project like a rail line or something like that. So it's, how are you going to pay for that? You're going to have to raise taxes, aren't you? Well, not necessarily, no. There's another thing about tax is the total pool is one thing, right? But who it comes from is important. So there's not a lot of point handing people on welfare money and then taking it back in tax.
No.
Doesn't that seem a bit inefficient
ridiculous.
to you? Yeah. But now we've got a situation where we're tax cutting for the wealthiest corporations on the planet.
Who are most able to afford taxes.
And also cutting services that make our country good. Like, for example, something that happens politically is both parties will do a study. They'll agree that this thing needs to be studied before we make a decision. And they'll go and do something like the Gonski examination of what we should do about education.
Yep.
And then over time, as it becomes politically annoying to agree with the other party, you'll go, "Oh, we'll do half of that,"
Which
or we'll water that down. You know.
I mean, if someone tells you this is how you can, I suppose, what's an analogy?
So you hire a bunch of experts to give you an answer, and they give you the answer, and then you go, "I don't like your answer."
I suppose an analogy would be like you get someone around to tell you how to bushfire-proof your house, and they tell you got to do X, Y, and Z, and you go, "Well, I can put sprinklers on the left-hand side of my house, but I won't bother with the right because I think the left's more important." And then your right catches on fire, and your house burns down.
And then you blame the person who did the study.
Yeah, even though, I mean, it's a holistic thing. It's all or nothing. You got to take into account that every little thing has an effect, and
the interconnected nature.
Yeah.
But I guess during this political news cycle, like one week it's one topic, the next week it's another topic, and everyone forgets what happened the week before.
Well, also people just say, "Oh, this, and this," and they don't actually explain anything.
Yeah, the lack of context.
Yeah, there's no content really. I mean, in a lot of what's said as well.
Yeah, I think I find Australian politics extremely vapid. Like, just really boring. It's so repetitive and it never gets anywhere. It's like you hear this analogy about question time as like kindergarten kids having a brawl.
Oh my God.
It's
How
ridiculous.
If
These are our representatives behaving this way.
Yep.
Why do we accept that?
If I had anybody in a work environment behave like they do in question time, they would be fired.
Right. And here's another analogy. Say you're employing a bloke and he lies to you. He says, "Yes, I did that work. Yes, I paid that bill. Yes, I ordered that thing."
You get in trouble.
You get in trouble.
And after a bit,
you
get
get
fired. Yeah.
Yeah. And now our representatives, who essentially we collectively employ, if they lie to us, that seems like it's 20-something million cases of fraud.
Well,
every time they tell
it is.
furphy, you know?
Well, you can think of it this way. As tax-paying citizens or just citizens of this democracy, as voters, we are the shareholders in this country.
If you treat it like a corporation, yeah.
For this analogy at least. Now, if the CEO of a corporation deliberately misleads the investors, he's guilty of fraud and could get serious criminal charges put against him.
They usually end up being, amounting to a fine.
Yeah, they manage to wriggle around, but there are threats of jail time.
But if the profit you can get out of fraud is larger than the fine you pay, then it makes good business sense to just keep lying your ass off.
But still, it is illegal for a shareholder, for a CEO to deliberately mislead shareholders. And if nothing else, he'll get stood down.
Yeah. And here's the thing about corporation, though. There's a thing called limited liability, where an individual who makes a bunch of decisions that are fraudulent or misleads his shareholders, he's not personally as liable as an average person would be if they did the same thing. So the company is the one that gets the penalty.
Yeah.
And when the company's large, the corporation's large, well, all you can really do is fine them.
Yeah.
Because if you fine them too much, the company folds and a lot of people lose their jobs.
Yeah.
And so this is an example of how private power can hold an economy hostage. So, back to the democracy thing. It seems to me like the more power we give to private interests, the less power the democracy has.
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean? So, especially in an economic context, the more we free market things, the more we sell our assets to private corporations to manage, the less we are allowed to vote on what to do with these things. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do.
So it's almost an inevitable result of capitalism that democracy declines at the same rate neoliberalism increases.
Well, look at the, what was it? The super profits tax. The mining super profits tax.
Oh, yes. Good example.
It was cheaper for the mining company to spend $20 million on an ad campaign to get it scrapped.
Axe the tax was all over the TVs, big red letters.
Yeah, it's just an economic equation. Cost of tax, X amount of dollars. Cost of telling them not to put the tax in, X amount of dollars. Well, Y amount of dollars. It costs less to tell us all it's a bad idea.
Yeah.
than for us to tax
and
them.
when we're talking about a margin in an election that might be 1% or maybe 2% swing,
Yeah.
if that ad campaign worth 20 million or 22 million, whatever it is,
Yeah.
actually affected or changed the minds of 2% of the population, it doesn't
Yeah.
seem like much, apart from that's what elections are won and lost on.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, and then you end up with what would have been a good policy or a reasonably good policy being trashed because the people that were going to get taxed spent $20 million to avoid it.
Money is power.
Yeah, because the problem, a lot of people don't realize that the mining industry is actually quite a small employer in this country.
Yeah, I was just reading the other day that most of the trucks are automated now.
Yeah,
The
a lot
great
of
big 2-story building size trucks.
Yep,
Yeah.
automated. And even regardless of that, education, tourism, and hospitality are actually Australia's biggest employers.
Probably more farmers than there are miners.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mining is a very small percentage of employment.
But it's very high profit though, right?
Yeah, a lot of profit, big companies, lots of money. But the other thing is, during the resource boom that we had a few years back now, it's gone. We ended up with a 2-speed economy.
Yeah.
We were actually being damaged by this boom. Now, a proper tax would have actually put that money into the economy for various things that would have
for
actually
the population's benefit.
Well, put it this way. Mining companies, often owned by foreign powers, or well, not foreign powers, foreign investors, corporations and the like, came to our country and for minimal cost dug up Australia and shipped it overseas. I mean,
And they keep the money.
They keep the money. They keep the resources. They actually just walked off with parts of our country and got charged almost nothing for it.
But there was revenue. There was revenue. And I think the mining boom was mostly in Howard's era, right? John Howard's era? Because I think what happened is he
continued
used...
well after that.
Well, just to speak about Howard for a sec anyway, I think what happened, and relates to having short memories in our population, is that he used the mining boom and the increase in revenue from digging up stuff and selling it, or allowing private corporations to do so, as an excuse. He used that as an excuse to cut taxes. So instead of putting some money aside in like an investment fund like the Norwegians did for their fossil fuel industry, he simply charged the rich people, the very people who were digging up all the stuff, less tax. So it effectively squandered a great big pile of wealth that our country had.
Yep.
And handed it, in the long term, to the very people who can most afford to pay tax.
Yeah. I mean, we are subsidizing these mining companies huge amounts of money as well, too.
Yeah.
I think, what is it, Gina Reinhardt, every time one of her big trucks fills up with diesel, she gets like $680 or something worth of subsidies. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
You know, that's more than a person on unemployment gets.
See, what would the threat be? Like, would Gina say, stuff you, I'm going to go mine another country? Is that...
Well, I suppose they talk about that, but the problem is iron ore is iron ore. And if we've got it in the ground, we've got it. It's an asset.
It doesn't disappear.
We don't have to sell it.
Yeah.
It's an asset we can use at some point.
Yeah.
And unless they're going to give us the right amount of money for it, they don't have to dig it up. Bugger them.
Well, we don't actually lose anything.
No, we don't.
Yeah.
We don't have to pay them to take away our assets.
So here's the thing. This is reminding me of the idea of GDP. I keep saying that. Here's the thing.
Yeah.
I've said it a few times in the podcast. It's a bad habit, I think. But GDP is the total gross domestic product of a country. Mm-hmm. Now, the larger and larger share of production that is attributable to, say, the 1%, the more they need to grow in order for GDP to grow.
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
So the more power over the economy that private corporations have, the more they hold us by the balls, so to speak. So if they start to decline, our GDP declines, and we can't have that. So that's why we keep sucking up to these huge corporations and trying to cut their taxes.
Well, they also get quite ruthless as well. Well, I know this has happened with Adani, I think, one of their mines. But
oh yeah, that bloody great big hole in the ground they're trying to build in Queensland. Yeah.
no, before that, there was
really?
one the bloody big hole they already dug.
Right.
Now, when you go and the government does try to make them agree to rehabilitate an area after they dig the crap out of it.
Right.
But what happens is a company, and I'm fairly certain Adani's done this, but I'd have to double check that before I put my name on it. But this is common practice. You dig a great bloody big hole. And when you finish digging that hole, you ask the government, all right, we're going to dig over there now. And the government says, well, you haven't rehabilitated your last hole. They say, well, unfortunately, if we don't get approval for the next hole, we won't have the money to rehabilitate the last hole.
Oh, we can't afford it. Right.
Yeah. So it's give us the next mine or we're just going to leave a dirty, big, contaminated hole.
But they do that anyway after the next mine comes along because they go, oh, yes, we're going to do that. It's just, we've put it down the track a few years.
Yeah,
Let's
we'll
kick the can down the road. We'll get to it. Yeah.
Yeah. But they actually use it as leverage, blackmail leverage, basically.
So the reason they don't have money is because they've already paid out the dividends to all the shareholders of the mining company. And on the books, it looks like they got no money.
Yeah.
So the profit's been looted, but the expenses haven't been paid.
Yeah. Yep. And they just swing it over the heads of people that obviously don't. Well, most politicians do end up when they retire finding nice, cushy jobs with people like this. They move into the private sector.
Yeah, this happens a lot with the revolving door in the US. Yeah, between private sector and government position and back again.
Here's something that's really fascinating too, by the way. When Australia tries to make a new law regarding tax, it employs accountants from some of the top accounting firms in Australia to do a lot of the work.
Mm-hmm.
It then passes a new law. The accountants then go and work for all the largest corporations. And because those particular accountants wrote the law, they all know how to go around the law.
Right. Yep. I totally see what you mean. I'm trying to think of an analogy for it for our viewers at home. It's like if I'm selling something, guttering.
Yeah.
I might encourage you, don't worry about cleaning your gutters. Don't worry. It'll be fine.
Yeah.
It'll be fine. Turns out it's not fine. I'm like, oh, well, I can help you out.
Yeah.
Right?
No worries. I can replace them. Not a problem.
Or the more we outsource the idea of lawmaking to the private sector, which happens a lot in financial stuff in the US, like a Wall Street executive will write the policy and then the representative who's elected puts the policy through without understanding anything about it.
Yeah, well, you can't expect what are some of the qualifications of these politicians? I mean...
It seems like there's a lot of lawyers.
Yeah, it does seem like there's a lot of lawyers.
Yeah, lawyers and accountants a lot of the time.
But I mean, a lawyer, you can't expect a lawyer to understand accountancy.
Yeah, this goes back to the idea of if you're going to make a policy about any aspect of society, surely it makes sense to ask the experts about that policy.
Problem is, if you've got experts that are employed by the people that are going to want to get around that law...
Yeah, there's a definite conflict of interest.
Yeah, and I mean, that's happening all over the place. You look at the number of investment properties and stuff owned by the Liberal government. And
the housing market is something that is just so screwed in this country. There's no way out of it as far as I can see.
Or even simple stuff like, what is it? When you buy a house, you've got to pay stamp duty.
Yep.
Stamp duty was brought in to pay for, I think it was either World War I or World War II.
Okay.
It was a temporary tax to cover the cost of a war.
Okay.
It
just stayed.
It stayed.
Okay.
They liked it.
The housing market is one of the things that I don't completely have a confident grasp on, much like a modern monetary theory and other things like that. But just one thing. I don't understand how an electorate can ask politicians to destroy their own income to make things fairer for poor people. I don't see how that's ever going to work. So you mentioned there's heaps of property investment in our parliamentarians.
Yeah.
Some of them have got dozens of properties.
Yep.
And it is against their personal interests to charge themselves more tax on their investment properties, which means that you're asking somebody to shoot themselves in the foot so that you can walk. Yes, that is a bad analogy, maybe. But another one is our private banking sector in Australia is most of their business. I think it's 60% of their business is in home loans. So all the home loans people have with overinflated house prices are actually that's what the banks are leveraged on.
Yeah.
So if the housing price collapsed suddenly, we would have a banking crisis and a budget emergency, and a lot of rich people would lose their investments. Yeah. And in the end, though, it doesn't really help poor people who can't afford a house in the first place, because the costs will inevitably be passed on to them.
So one of the things you just mentioned there, collapse suddenly, okay? That brings up...
Yep, that's what happens when bubbles burst.
Yeah, that is what happens when bubbles burst, and that is what will happen when the current bubble bursts.
Yeah, because that's the thing. It's still under debate whether it is a bubble or not. Because people have been calling it a bubble for at least 5 years.
Or 10. It's just been getting crazy.
It just never seems to burst.
The thing is, though, whenever we talk about policies like this and people say, yeah, but if we take it away, all of a sudden shock horror. Well, the problem is we've known that how in the last 30 years, I'm just off the top of my head quoting a graph I saw once here, so bear with me, but in the last 30 years, real wages have gone up about 27%. Property prices have gone up 127%.
Okay.
So we can see over the last 30 years, it was very obvious that there was an affordability problem growing for decades.
Something I think I've mentioned to you before is the idea that even back, I think it was the 50s when post-World War II, women had already been working during World War II.
Yeah.
As soon as it was all made official that women were allowed to work, instead of the average household having more income, the cost of housing just inflated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So almost overnight, like within a year, housing spiked.
Mm-hmm.
So now you've got two people working for what one person used to be able to afford.
Whoa. Well, there's a whole other bunch of issues as well.
It's like it's self-correcting market mechanisms to make sure nobody gets ahead.
Yeah. Well, Australia now, I think we're facing, for the first time in history, the majority of Australians will never own a home.
Well, I don't think I ever will.
Yeah. And, I mean, the only people that can own homes, well, when you look at Gen Y, so like 30 and under, roughly.
Okay.
Maybe I think it's like 32 and under or something like that.
Oh, yeah. I just want to insert an analogy here. Imagine the world is like a monopoly board, and neoliberalism means everyone goes stacks on trying to buy up whatever property they can, and then pretty soon every single property is owned and it's all got hotels on it, and then a new generation is born. And that new generation looks at the game and goes, "You what? You want me to play this game that's already over, and you're blaming me for not being hard enough working or not being prosperous or whatever it is."
Yeah.
Like, that's an impossible ask for anyone. What's left?
Crazy.
What's in it for them?
Yeah, no, it is crazy. And it's actually pretty much like that now.
It's like when the entire world is owned and fenced, what's a new generation supposed to do?
Yeah.
That's why we have this idea of the commons or public property, is because no matter how much of the private sector, how much it owns, at least there's some things that are off limits.
Yeah.
And neoliberalism, which is Liberal National Party, most of Labor, I guess, are really keen on the idea of abolishing public property, which is a problem.
It is. It's
so just recently in Australian politics, some arsehat came up and said, yes, we need to privatise Medicare. We were talking about this before as if it was a threat that was underneath the radar waiting to surface like Jaws, you know?
Yeah. No,
but it's actually openly being said now that we need to follow the American path.
Which
have they seen the American path?
Anybody that suggests privatising Medicare has literally said we should make sure that at least 40,000 people die a year.
Right. Yeah, there are casualties for cost-cutting policies like that and privatisation policies of essential services.
I mean, to be honest, it won't be 40,000 a year in Australia.
Yeah, but people
different
die.
population.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
That's the thing. Another thing that the electorate doesn't really seem to get is because economics seems like voodoo. It's some mysterious thing that other people know about, and I just trust them, right? Yeah. They don't realise the actual real effects of a small cut in the greater society. So, for example, if you cut 20% from the medical budget or something like that, that kills people.
Yeah.
If you cut education over the long term, that will also kill people.
Well, what is it in the US? For every 1% of unemployment, something like 10,000 people die or something.
Oh, that was
ridiculous.
from the movie Big Short.
Yeah.
Talking about the 2008 derivatives bubble and
Yeah.
collapse. And it was Brad Pitt's character said, for every 1% unemployment rises, 40,000 people die.
Right.
So you might be happy with your investment, kids, but just don't fucking dance.
Yeah.
You've bet against the American economy and the American people.
Yeah,
and people are
that
going
was
to die
that was a
from
good
this.
movie too. But the point being that unemployment kills. Not so
Yes.
much in Australia because
Yep.
we have Social Security and we've got Medicare. You take away welfare and you take away Medicare, you kill people. And there's no two ways about it. People will
And so
die because of that.
That means an increase in domestic violence, an increase in drug abuse,
Yep.
an increase in discontent generally.
General crime,
General
violence.
crime, vandalism.
We're asking basically by removing Medicare and things like that, the further we go down that road, the more violence we build. We end up with a society of gangs and destruction and death.
A lot of policy that continues economic inequality, continues to exacerbate it, is violent. And that's something that a lot of people don't get, how violent it is.
Yeah.
If someone's got no money, they don't have an opportunity to forward plan.
No. I mean, you look at the least criminal, the least violent countries in the world. They're all places that, well, they either behead everybody that does anything slightly wrong, or they have fantastic social welfare policies
Yes,
and
and
healthcare and
much
employment and so on.
Lower gap, much smaller gap between rich
They
and
look
poor.
after people.
Yep.
Or just
There was a
kill
book
them.
called, I forget the author, but there's a book called The Spirit Level.
Yeah.
And it's a little bit controversial in lots of ways, but it made a case that countries are pretty much always better if they've got a lower gap between rich and poor.
Yeah.
If there's more economic equilibrium, or at least closer together, less of a gap, the country performs better in almost everything you can measure. Now, this is staggering. I'm talking about they do better in the Olympics.
Oh, wow.
You know, just every single aspect of society becomes better performing if there's less of a gap between rich and poor.
Yeah. I suppose that's something worth noting. I mean, you and I, we rant on about rich people and all sorts of stuff like that. But it is worth probably mentioning that being wealthy isn't the problem. You know, you can have a large house and a few $1 million. I mean, that's not a massive problem. Mostly we're talking about the top echelons of wealthy.
Yeah, I don't think people really understand the staggering scale of wealth disparity.
Because, I mean, you can get quite wealthy and still be in a reasonably large percentage of the population. But there is this very small percentage at the top that it's not a little bit wealthy. It's not a little bit more wealthy than the wealthiest person. It is ridiculously more wealthy.
We're talking about single individuals who have budgets larger than most countries.
Yeah. What is it? The wealthiest 8 people in the world have as much capital as the bottom 3.5 billion.
Right. And if anyone thinks that is at all justifiable, I don't know what to say to them. That's insane.
Yeah, it's just, well, it's murderous, actually. It causes a lot of death and destruction. It's just horrific.
Because it's optional. See, here's the thing about personal property and private property we don't really seem to examine anymore. The podcast that we rejected discussed this idea because it was a bit ranty and it went off on too many tangents. But there was one idea in there which was important. So we all work together collectively to produce things, and a lot of the capital or the wealth that's produced goes to very few people.
Yeah.
Those few people become very powerful politically and economically, and they start to control the country much more than anybody else does, or even the world. But there's something in there that is unexamined in our political narrative, which is why is it the case that we accept the idea of a multi-billionaire being able to keep all their wealth at the same time as there are starving children?
Yeah.
If we have billionaires and starving children at the same time,
it's broken.
our priorities are completely fucked.
Yeah, definitely.
There's no other way to say it. They're completely fucked.
Yeah.
We call ourselves a moral or ethical society. No.
Yeah, no, it's...
See, for some reason, the idea of taking away some of that wealth and giving it to the people who need it is abhorrent. Why would you, how do you justify
we
that?
have this respect for people that work hard and earn money. The problem is the people at the top of the scale that we're talking about taking money from inherited all their money.
Well, they inherited the start of it at
Or
least.
enough that it was already ridiculous.
Yeah.
They inherited enough money that they did not need to... There was no reason for them to take any money from anybody ever in their life.
Now, this relates to the idea that the larger your bank account, the more meritorious you are.
Yeah.
So a person's worth is not their value to society, it's how much they have acquired from society.
Yeah.
So, like, I was just thinking about our George W. over in the US there, right? He failed at everything he tried, was a drug addict, and because he was born to the right family,
Yeah.
he got chance after chance after chance and eventually became president of the most powerful military in the world.
And then we look at dear Trump.
Yep.
You know, and what is it? His daddy gave him $10 million or something. No, it's more than that. I'm not sure.
I don't remember, but he started off with a sizable
his dad,
bankroll, same as Gina Reinhardt.
Yeah, gave him a huge amount of money, and he went and failed to run any business ever. Every single business I think he's ever attempted went bankrupt.
Well, he reminds me of a mobster in that way.
Yeah. They all folded. Actually, the bizarre thing is he would be wealthier today if he just left the money his dad gave him in an interest-earning bank account.
Yeah.
Just a standard goddamn bank account.
Getting his 3% compound interest, he would be richer now than if he...
Doing business lost him money.
And now he's in charge of the most...
Yeah, and people hail him as some sort of, grand business master that's going to save the economy or something. He is the opposite.
That's why I don't think he's stupid. Because even though he has royally stuffed up every single endeavor he has ever tried, he still has this public brand which got him into the Oval Throne.
It's because people are gullible.
Well, that's
winning
the thing.
smile.
You just said people are gullible, and yeah, that might be true.
Yeah.
There's something I want to talk about, though, is how people make their decisions. So if people's decisions are based on the narrative coming out of politics and the narrative coming out of media, if that turns out to be wrong, i.e. they've been lied to, they vote accordingly.
Yeah.
So people who consider themselves rational thinking individuals have no idea that they're operating under false assumptions.
No.
You see what I mean?
No, it's very hard to know whether or not what you're actually believing is real.
Well, especially these days, because the world is a sea of opinions.
Oh yeah, you can get facts for any opinion.
Yes. I'm going to suggest we take a short break here, or maybe that'll wrap up the episode. Actually, we've been going for about 40 minutes.
Oh, really?
Yeah. All right. So let's wrap this one up.
Okay.
And what the hell did we talk about? We talked about
know, but
economics.
I still have a point to make about Gen Y. I'll do it next time.
I'll do it now. Go on.
Well, now hang on. It's completely out of context now.
All right. Tack a note on the end. Go on.
I was going to say that Gen Y, we were talking about housing affordability.
Yeah, and the Monopoly board.
Yeah, and then we're talking about Gen Y. And Gen Y, 90% of Gen Y now has casual or contract work.
Right.
So the chance
completely insecure.
Yeah. So even if they work their ass off, it is very hard for them to have a job long enough to even be considered by a bank.
Right. I think we mentioned that in maybe the first or second episode.
Yeah, we probably did.
We talked about the insecurity of casualized labor.
Yeah.
I want to talk about automation next.
Automation?
The automation of our workforce.
Oh, that's awesome.
Maybe that's for next time.
Okay.
All right. Cheerio. Peace.
Love you.
Hey, thanks for listening. We hope our discussion was useful in providing additional perspectives about the topics of today. We hope you join us again next time. Bye-bye. Peace.